Appearance on Dion's Daily Dose does not imply endorsement from or by any candidate or guest. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by Dion Bergeron or Dion's Daily Dose are his own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of any guest. Material and information presented is for general information purposes only. The Dion's Daily Dose name in all forms and abbreviations are the property of its owners, and its use does not imply endorsement of or opposition to any specific organization, product, or service. If you'd like to support the show, please visit our Patreon at patreon.com/Dion's Daily Dose.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Dion's Daily Dose. We are joined today by a very special guest, John Westercamp. He is a candidate for Indiana's Attorney General. So he was kind enough to join us tonight at 7 o'clock. The floor is yours. Tell people about you, those who aren't familiar with you.
Well, thanks. I'm a lifelong Hoosier, a lifelong Republican, and a lifelong conservative. I grew up on the south side of Indianapolis in Greenwood in Johnson County, went to Purdue and IU, and so I'm truly a product of our Hoosier state. And I work in the private sector representing small businesses and businesses transactions and regulatory compliance. So I've seen a lot of my clients crushed by government intrusion, federal overreach, and a bunch of other issues. And want to bring that perspective to the Attorney General's office. I've been to every state in Indiana, at least one time, been to Lake County many times. I think that's where we met originally. Isn't that right, Dion?
Well, I met you down in Indianapolis for the first time at the Congress of Counties.
Yeah,
yep.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's okay.
But then we all the Lincoln Day dinners are flowing together now.
Right.
Yeah.
That was the second one. Yep.
Right. Yep. And then we were supposed to have 80 dinners between March and April, and then coronavirus hits.
Right.
This is what's happened, and a lot of people are struggling. And I talk to people every day around the state. I feel like I get a sample of our population. Some people that are delegates that are going to convention have the virus, have someone that is in their family that has the virus, have a business that's shut down because of the virus. Everybody's been affected by this.
Right. And that's something that not a lot of people, at least that I've talked to, are really aware of, is the way that this has, obviously it's affected businesses, it's affected people who have been laid off, but it's also had a massive effect on the normal political process.
Absolutely.
Right?
Well, absolutely, because particularly, and I can't speak to your race in the first congressional district. I'm not running in a primary. I'm running in a convention race. Convention races traditionally are much, much more retail politics, where people expect you to show up in their communities, in their living rooms, at all the dinners and everything else to meet the candidate and press the flesh, which I really like. And I've been to the convention a number of times myself. I've loved that process from the perspective of a voter. But I've also liked it from the perspective of a candidate, because you get to actually know the people that are voting for you in a more substantive way than just a 30-second commercial would provide you if you were running for statewide office in a primary.
Right. And that's something too that we've seen is, at least in my race, right? Everyone was geared up. We had debates coming. We had all these functions, and like you mentioned, the dinners. We had dinner after dinner after dinner lined up, and then all of a sudden, everything's at a screeching halt. And people have had to kind of get creative as to the ways that they interact with the voters. Like me, I do the live stream, but what have you had to change? Because like you said, we had all these dinners lined up, all these engagements that were ready to go knock on doors or meet people like the delegates that are going to actually go to the convention and vote. What changes have you implemented?
Well, I think it's more of a subtraction rather than an addition. So everybody, the mails are not stopped by the coronavirus. So you can still mail whatever you'd like to the delegates, and I'm certainly doing that. Social media is not affected, so I'm active on that. And there's
See?
Mail. I'm glad the Postal Service came through.
That they certainly did. They delivered. I'm trying to line this up. There we go. His mailer, and that's good. At least that's one way to reach people. I am running as unopposed for precinct person and was selected as a delegate. So I'll be, one of the ones that actually make the decision for that. What would you like to say to any other delegates that might be watching this?
Well, I hope to be out on the road as soon as I can. I'm really happy that I started when I did. I've been on the road for nearly 15 months. I started going around the state in January of 2019 and asking two questions. Is there a desire for new leadership? Is there a path to victory? Spent 6 months exploring possibility of running for attorney general and learned from talking to people around the state. I think I hit 42 counties in those first 6 months, that there was a desire for new leadership and there was a path to victory. And my grandfather was a veteran of Iwo Jima, and he had a profound impact on me growing up. When I was a little boy, he took me to get coffee and donuts. He had the coffee and I had the donuts. And he told me what it was like to get strafed by enemy aircraft and watch our flag go up over Mount Suribachi. And so that set off an interest in history, an interest in government, and ultimately an interest in law that's led me now to run for attorney general. My service will never match or equal my grandfather's service in World War II. But nevertheless, if my grandfather was willing to go halfway around the world and put his life on the line, there is a need for strong conservative leadership in the attorney general's office. And Indiana has given me so much, I have an obligation to give back.
Okay. What's, if you could, who do you look to as far as an example of a good, strong attorney general, someone that you would like to kind of exemplify? Do you have someone in mind?
Well, I'll tell you, so as an attorney general type, I think it's important to have a view of the law. And the person who's most shaped my view of what the law is,
there we go.
Justice Scalia.
Okay.
He was the founder of the Federalist Society, of which I'm a part, and really is the intellectual captain of originalism and renewing our commitment to the actual meaning of the Constitution, the meaning of statutes and regulations. They matter, and the business of law starts and ends with the text. And so as a lawyer, your job is not to insert your policy preferences into the law. It's to give a fair reading of the law as it was passed, as it was ratified at the time that it was passed or ratified. And so as Attorney General, I want to have that, I'll be responsible for advising state agencies, advising state legislators on what the law is. And I will do it faithfully without favor or fear and without distorting the text or inserting what I think the text ought to say rather than what it actually says. And I think even more broadly speaking, there's a need for people to step up, attorneys general from around the United States, and insist that the federal courts give the original understanding of the Constitution its meaning. And that's what I will do as Attorney General. Okay,
awesome. That sounds really good. I'm really glad to hear that that's important to you as far as the originality and the way that it was intended when it was written, because so often, and keeping politics out of it, because so often we have those who want to take what's done and twist it to fit what they want it to say.
Yep.
Chris Wells has a question. How are you fundraising right now?
Well, I guess it's not door to door, if that's the question. I didn't realize that that there could be questions like that. It's interesting. So you just you do the best you can. You call people and you do the same thing fundraising that you do asking people to vote. You ask them to support you, and you give them the pitch and say there's a need, and you've got to spend money on a bunch of things, pieces of mail like you just showed, and other things like that. And so there's no trick to fundraising, just like there's no trick to getting people's vote. You just have to work hard. And that's what we've been doing the last 15 months. And that's what we'll do the next 60 days and beyond. So, right.
I forgot to put his up on here. I'm not a pro at this by any means. I kind of had to figure it out as I went along. He mentioned that mailers are expensive, and it's hard to have fundraising right now, right? With millions of Americans out of work, with many more that are losing their businesses. It's really hard to look at people and say, hey, can you give me money?
Right. It is. So, and I'll ask Chris. Chris, checks payable to Friends of John Westercamp if you're interested. So
there you go.
Now we're incorporating podcasts into fundraising. So
There you go. And that's what we tried to do. I personally, obviously, that a congressional campaign takes ridiculous amounts of money.
Yeah.
And it's just so hard for me personally. I don't like asking people for money at the best of times, but given today's climate, right, with the number of unemployment skyrocketing and all the things that are going on, it's so hard for me to look at people and say, I can use your money better than you can. Because that's what it comes down to, for me, fundraising right now. Now, once people get back to work and all that stuff, hopefully this is all over with by the time the primary's over and the general hits, yeah, by all means, send your money, payable too. But it's really difficult right now with the everybody out of work. Not everybody, but so many people. One thing I wanted to bring up, if you're okay with it, we had a discussion when I was down at Congress of Counties.
Yeah.
I've noticed on your site, you say, and you mentioned it then, that you've actually been to every county in Indiana.
I have. One time.
That's impressive. That's impressive. How long did it take you?
I did it all last year. So wow. I hit every county last year, and then we were on our way to do every county again this year. And then the virus hit, and that sort of upset our plans. I'll add this as a personal note, in addition to getting engaged and getting married last year. So last year was a pretty good year.
Yeah.
But I knew if I was going to do this, I wanted to send a message to the whole state that I was going to represent every part of our state, that I wanted to talk to every community, county, every corner of our state. And that's also why when I announced my candidacy on June 27th, that I announced not only in Indianapolis, but also in Elkhart and Fort Wayne and Evansville, all on the same day, because I wanted to send a strong message that I'm gonna work on behalf of the entire state. I thought that was important.
It is important, and it's something that I wish more people would do. Do you know of anyone else that has done this before you? Kind of visited every county and made people feel as if you truly represent all Hoosiers rather than just the Indy area, which is what we've seen in the past.
I have not done the research to know if other attorneys.
Okay, me either. I was just wondering if you knew offhand.
I know other candidates that are statewide candidates have traveled the whole state, but I wouldn't be able to give you a list. I can say pretty confidently that I'm the only current candidate running for Attorney General who's been every single county.
Right.
But it has been a tremendously helpful experience to do that, because there's different. I mean, I say all the time, 50 state governments mean 50 different state solutions to different public policy problems. New York is not the same as California. The same is true at the local level, too. The problems in some parts of southern Indiana are not the same problems in central or northern Indiana. And so the only way you learn that sort of thing is by going and visiting the people and learning what's on their mind.
Right. And I think more people should realize that. Just in Northwest Indiana, we have three very different areas, right? The three different counties that comprise District 1, Lake County, Porter County, and then just a slice of the western slice of LaPorte County are three very different areas, even so close together, right? You have some very big open agricultural areas in LaPorte County and Porter County, whereas Lake is almost entirely urban. Right. So it does take, a different view depending on what area is being talked about or represented, because Indiana is north to south, very, very big in comparison to some other states, and comprises a huge amount of real estate. It's
a bigger state than you think it is when you start traveling around.
It is. A lot of people don't realize that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been to 50 states. Well, sorry, I misspoke. 48 of 50 states.
Okay.
Alaska and Hawaii, maybe someday, but
I would prioritize Hawaii.
I'd love to go to Hawaii. I think it would be awesome. I'd love to go to Alaska as well, but there are many states that are like the same all the way through, right? Other than your little, your cities here and there, but Indiana actually comprises a very diverse, population and content from one end to the other. It's very different. Northern Indiana is very different than Southern Indiana.
Right, and even different parts among Northern, like you had mentioned before. So you're right, and the economies are different, and so there's different things driving the local communities, and so the only way to learn that is by going and visiting. And so anybody who's interested in going with me is welcome to jump in the car next time we open up the state. So
there you go. Yeah, that'd be awesome. I'd tag along for that.
Absolutely, anytime.
Appreciate it. So what would you say the easiest thing to do? I kind of lost my train there for a minute, but
happens to everybody sometimes.
It does. I was going to ask something and then I kind of lost it. So different question.
That's okay. Well, you were talking about fundraising a little earlier. The one thing that sticks out to me about fundraising, people think that you'll remember the people who gave the most amount of money being really meaningful. And I'll tell you, that's not been my experience at all. In fact, what I keep on my desk at work, a check that I received from a gentleman when I was doing my exploratory committee. I knocked on his door and he learned that I sat on his porch and talked to him about why I wanted to be attorney general, and learned that he was a bus driver, and just about his life and his convictions about the conservative values. And he came to my announcement, or one of my announcements, when I announced for attorney general. And then I shook his hand and I said, "Hey, it's good to see you again." And he pulled out of his pocket a check and then put it in my hand. And it was a check for $25. And he said, I'm supporting you because of integrity. And I thought, wow, that is a message that really touched me at my core. And I keep it on my desk to remind me that that's the expectation that this gentleman had for me. And that's what I want to live up to, both as a candidate, but also as hopefully the next Attorney General of Indiana, is to live up to his expectation of integrity. And dipping deep into his pockets to give $25. And so that, I think, has been the most meaningful gift that I've received along the campaign trail. And similarly, it's usually the private, and I'm sure you've gotten this running for office. It's not anytime you're introduced, people say nice things about you, and that's always very flattering. But it's actually the messages that you get on Facebook or through a text, and some encouragement that said, I really like this. This really encouraged me. That's really the most meaningful thing, because they're not doing it for any other reason other than they wanted to let you know they like what you're standing for, and that's really what encourages me. So I always write it down. My wife and I have a blessings board in our kitchen to encourage gratitude from the both of us. And without fail, if somebody does something like that, it always goes on our board. So.
That is really awesome. And I wholeheartedly agree with you. Some of the most meaningful interactions that I've gotten as a candidate isn't like going and talking to the groups that are going to decide if they're going to endorse you. That's part of it, right? That's part of running. It's the people who personally message you or personally come to a meet and greet and talk about how you speak to them on a personal level, and you are the kind of person that they want to see, right? Mm-hmm. It's not the amount, it's the dedication involved. It's the belief that this person has in you. And it's really not wanting to let these people down. And that's at least from me. My wife says a blessing board is a great idea. Liz, you met her down there as well.
Thanks, Liz. I encourage it, particularly in the winter months when things get depressing with darkness and everything in Indiana, seasonal depression and everything. A blessing board is a great idea to just say every day, here's something wonderful that I didn't deserve that happened. So that also, your comment reminded me, one of the most important things I think that we need to have as candidates is the idea that we're public servants, and that everybody says that as a candidate running for an office. But I feel that doubly running for Attorney General, and here's why. In my job in the private sector as a lawyer, I am a trusted fiduciary. I advise businesses on decisions that could make or break them, on legal matters that, is this legal, is this not? and they depend on me for my honest judgment and for my time. Lincoln said our stock and trade as lawyers is time and judgment. And so when you're someone's lawyer, you're not the boss, and you're not the show. You're the fiduciary. You're the trusted servant. You're like a steward to that person. And so running for Attorney General, being the lawyer for the state of Indiana, I want to be doubly the public servant to serve members of the General Assembly, to serve the administrative agencies and the other stakeholders within state government, so that the policymakers in state government can be properly advised of what the law is, what the law could be, what the options are, and how to defend and execute the laws that have been passed and have been adopted.
Right. And I think I'm glad you said that, because so many people get it in their mind that running for office, yeah, they give lip service to the fact that they're going to be public servants, but what it really is for them, and no names, just people know, kind of when you start talking about it, who they are, mm-hmm. that look at it as either a stepping stone to a bigger office, a bigger election down the road, or they look for the benefits. They're not looking to really represent people or do what the people need, right? It's just they're just running because they think they can profit off of it, for lack of a better term. Well, not just financially, but with status, with stuff like that. And so many people lose that connection mm-hmm. when they're running. And so I'm glad you mentioned that. Another thing that I noticed, and I've said this before, and this wasn't kind of in your campaign thing. This was as we were kind of having an off the books conversation.
Sure.
You were the only person running for AG, and I've met a couple that have mentioned corruption and how it is here. And I felt that really spoke to me, and it's why I really wanted to get you on, because all over Indiana, not any one particular area or, picking on any mm-hmm. particular group.
Sure.
And it's across the U.S. It's not just in Indiana, but corruption is deep seated, right? In many, many areas across the country and, across the state.
Right.
What do you think we can do as regular voters? Mm-hmm. What do you think that we can do to get rid of that and get rid of that corrupt culture that's permeated so many institutions in so many areas?
Right. I have good news and I have bad news.
Right.
The good news and bad news is the same. You get the government that you vote for. And so the people get the government they deserve. And so people have to demand better government to get better government. And that may involve sacrifice, sad to say. There's not an easy pill that you can take that'll make great government. I mean, that means getting involved in a local campaign for a candidate that you think has integrity, that will advance the ball that way, or giving financially, or talking to your neighbors. I think we underestimate the influence that we have as voters to say, I know this person, he's a good person, I'm voting for him because I know when no one's looking, he'll do the right thing. And that can have a profound impact, even more than the party label can have an impact. To know that someone is a person of integrity, as the Bible says, a man of good repute is worth more than great riches. So there's not an easy answer. I guess the answer simply is get involved and demand better government. And you're doing that right now. You're running for Congress, and I'm sure one of the reasons you're doing that is because you feel that we need more integrity in Washington, D.C. And, mm-hmm. and I'm running for Attorney General because I'm afraid that Washington, D.C. will yet again fail us, and that it will take a strong Attorney General to be the stopgap between Washington and us and our liberties.
That's I'm right there with you with that. That's one of the things that I personally have noticed with my campaign, and it's one of the things that I truly appreciate is the people that go out of their way to tell other people. I think that is greatly underestimated, the value that has and the impact that has on people. When you go, hey, I've talked to this person face to face, I've looked them in the eye, and I believe them. That's, I don't think people understand how important that is when you're talking to someone and they're relaying your message mm-hmm. or sharing your information, to know that they've had a personal interaction with this person and they believe in them.
Right. Yep. do your due diligence. And I think that's what you're doing with the show in a small way, is having different people, not necessarily just Republicans, on your show to talk about political issues and do it in a conversational way. And that's one thing I really liked about the podcast culture, is you can have a longer form conversation with people about important matters that don't get narrowed down to a 5-second clip or a 10-second, or a Twitter post. Right.
And I will say it's been kind of weird for me. I never really thought about doing anything like this, like a podcast or a show or any of that stuff. Once kind of everything got shut down, we're like, well, no more knocking on doors. What are we going to do? But I will say it has opened up a lot of opportunities to, like with you, for example, to have a real conversation about things that bother, us, but also to expand on things that we wouldn't get the opportunity to do in some kind of staged event like a forum or even the various dinners and whatnot. It allows people to really kind of get an insight as to who this person really is beyond their stage presence, right?
That's right. Sometimes the only thing they may see is, this is John Westercamp wave, and then I'll sit down and now we're going to announce 30 other people.
Right. Right. So what would you like to see happen with, so we have, like, different states have different ways of dealing with this whole shutdown thing, right?
Yep.
And I'm not going to get you into political hot water by asking you any kind of hard questions as far as, your take on this or what the governor's done or any of that, because that's not why I wanted you on the show. But I'm curious, as a citizen, not as AG, but as a citizen, and this I saw something on Twitter earlier that asks about the Fifth Amendment versus like this shutdown of businesses, right? And I was like, I didn't really consider that, because the government, has to reimburse people if they take the property.
Sure, yeah.
But does this apply? And I know it's not a straight, transition, but what's your take on that? And do you think that there's some ground to be made there with not interpreting, but seeing people made whole in the aftermath of this, the business owners and stuff like that who have been forced to lose everything?
Yeah, there's no question that people have lost lots of things during this crisis. Some have lost their lives. Some or have been hospitalized, not lost their lives. They've lost time. They've lost their businesses. Other people may lose their jobs, and they may yet lose their jobs. And all of that is tragic. And we should try to be doing as much as we can as people to mitigate the bad effects of that. The question that you raise is one that I think is novel in terms of the Fifth Amendment, and a question that I should look at, that people should look into, the takings clause of the Fifth Amendment. And, if the government takes your property, they have to give you just compensation. So here's the question, though, and I don't know offhand if there's been a case.
Yeah.
Look, I'm a law guy, and I've run to the law books if I don't know the answer to something. But zoning would be a great example of the government taking something from you, but it's not a taking in the understanding of the Fifth Amendment. And so they're limiting your ability to use property in a way that you would like to use property. The question will be, and this is unknown and unknowable at this point, how long does this go on? And so is it a taking if it's only shut down for a month? Because you've deprived it of all economic value of a company for a month, but only for a month. So it's limited in time. If it was indefinite, would that be a taking? Would it not be a taking? I think that would require me to do a little more legal research. I think it's a legitimate question. And I think policymakers are grappling right now with how do they ameliorate the effects of this to the extent that they can. Congress is acting and trying to give small businesses loans. There's the stimulus checks that are going out to citizens. So in a way, people are trying to compensate. But even if, let's say, the government does give just compensation, and this is found to be a taking, there's still going to be a loss to society as a whole, that the society will have to take the hit. And so there's no way around that, because as conservatives, we don't believe that the government prints money. They tax us to get the money, right? Money, we don't have money trees. And so, so even if the government ends up compensating people for their losses, somebody's going to have to pay for that. Someone's going to have to take the hit. And that's really the tragedy of this virus, is that the economy was going gangbusters. Things were going great. People were looking at their 401k going, let's keep this going. And out of nowhere, this happens. And it really shows. People have talked to me and said, well, I'm concerned about the growth of government intrusion and authoritarianism and that sort of thing. And I've said there's the opportunity here for conservatives to make the limited government argument, to say, look, the government doesn't have control of as much as the left would have you think, right? They cannot control a microorganism. And if they can't control a microorganism, should they be running every facet of our lives and micromanaging every part of it? And so there is the conservative argument for limited government during the midst of the coronavirus.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I was just wondering what your take on it was, because I hadn't thought of it from a Fifth Amendment perspective. There's a lot of talk about, okay, get this passed, get that passed, like you said, the relief effort, the PPP. But from an actual Fifth Amendment perspective, I hadn't, I'm not an attorney, but I hadn't even thought of that. I was like, okay. So I didn't know if that was something that may end up being something that gains traction, or if it's just kind of an out the window thing.
Could be litigated. And I think there might be a distinction, and it's been a while since I've looked at the Fifth Amendment. I haven't had a lot of clients come to me with Fifth Amendment questions.
Yeah, I could see that.
But usually the Fifth Amendment comes up in the context of a government order where you are particularly disadvantaged because the government passes general statutes all the time that encumber people's property rights. But they're general, they're rules. They're not orders. You specifically have to give up this property right, and so that may be another distinction that the court would consider. So I would have to do a little more legal research. It's certainly a legitimate question. The broader point I would have is that society is going to have a loss one way or another, whether we socialize that cost by the Constitution, by a statute, or otherwise.
Right. Yeah, Chris has a point to that, which I think it's important to make. Chris said, again, I think it's the states who are shutting down businesses, not the Fed, which is correct. So why would Fed pay someone back? To clarify, I didn't mean the Fed should pay someone back, but if a state has
clause in the Indiana Constitution.
Right. So I didn't mean it from a federal. I guess I should have clarified. I didn't mean it from a federal. I meant it from a state's perspective. Obviously, it would be difficult to even make the argument that the Fed is forcing anything to shut down. So you're right on that, Chris. It is on an individual state-by-state basis. And my wife had a question, which you already covered. What made you want to become a lawyer, and what made you run for AG? He covered that at the beginning of the hour. If you had actually connected instead of playing video games on your phone, you'd actually know that. But
I can answer it anyhow.
Okay.
We won't penalize your wife. She could be a delegate for so.
No. Hey, for what it's worth, she runs everything. I just I get to make my little snide comments, and that's all I get to do. So.
Sure. My grandfather was a veteran of Iwo Jima, and we had a special relationship when I was younger. He would take me, out to get coffee and donuts, and he told me about what his service was like during World War II. And he was at Iwo Jima, saw the flags go up, the first and the second flag on Mount Suribachi. That had a profound impact on my thinking as a child, that here's a guy who was willing to put his life on the line. And then when he came back from the war, he volunteered to go on the Indianapolis Fire Department at a time when they didn't have a lot of high-tech stuff. He didn't use a gas mask. They ran into burning buildings when people were running out of them. And so he was willing to serve his community and his country and put it all on the line. And so I became very interested in World War II and read everything that I could about it. And my interest in history grew to an interest in government, and interest in government grew to an interest in law. And so I wanted to become a lawyer through hearing the stories of my grandfather. And I've been working in the private practice of law representing small businesses. And I've just seen my my clients struggle because of federal overreach and government overreach and intrusion generally. And the Attorney General plays a critical role in defending the rights of the state and Hoosiers' rights. And I want to lead that effort as the next Attorney General.
I hope that answers your
That's
question there, Liz. Again, so what would you hope? Hold on, I saw it up here. Trying to get through these comments here. Paul did mention earlier, because when we were talking about actually representing the people, he mentioned because those candidates never jumped in for the people, and he also agrees that someone actually understands. I want to tell you, Paul he's one of your biggest fans.
Thank you.
He's also one of my supporters. So I thought that was one reason why I felt it was really important to get you on there. Charlie Callis says he wants to be a delegate just for you.
Thank you.
So let's see here. Cooley Priestley said maybe if everyone voted. I know other people have some questions that I'm working on. Doug Ham said, keep up the good work.
Thanks, Doug.
So I think this one is we haven't kind of had. How has the shutdown changed how you ran your campaign? Not fundraising, because we kind of talked about fundraising a little bit.
So I would say it's taken off the table going door to door, number one, and you mentioned that earlier. And that's very unfortunate, because that was, we were planning on doing that. And a couple months ago, my wife and I, we did the whole Lincoln Day circuit last year together, and it's an exhausting thing, because usually you're driving a couple hours someplace, you spend a couple hours there, you come back, and you do it again the next day and the next day and the next day. So we went to McDonald's a couple of months ago, and we were looking at our schedules to say, how are we going to plan the next 2 months of our lives and go to all of these events, because a lot of times they're double, triple, and quadruple booked. There's multiple events per night. And so we sat down and I said, well, I'm going to go to this one and you can go to that one. And the next night we'll go to this one together. And we sat down, we figured all of that out. We get right to the height of the Lincoln Day ramping up. I think there was one that right before the shutdown, there was a Warren Township on Thursday. There was another one in Clay County on Friday. There were 3 that we went to that Saturday: Stark, Pulaski, and Tipton. And I'm sorry.
Oh, that's perfectly okay.
Someone's calling me, and I'm not sure how to turn that off. And so we were going to go bust into the Lincoln Day circuit. So then that ended, and so we had 80 dinners on our calendar. And that just totally changed. And nobody, we still really don't know what's the plan going forward. There's a bigger question, though, that's been raised now, which is, how do you have a convention full of 2,000 people with balloons and all the rest, like we all know about, when today we can't gather with more than 10 people in a particular place? Will public health policy change between now and then? What will happen? And so that's really the big question that I have as a candidate. I'm sure that a lot of delegates have too. How's this going to work? And the most important thing that, my perspective is, I want everybody, all the delegates, to be able to vote, and I want everybody to be safe. And if those two things are met, then great. So I'm understanding of what the party's doing now is it's planning on having the in-person convention on June 19th and 20th. But it's also planning on it. But they're also planning on making other arrangements so that delegates can vote, if not in person, then perhaps through the mail. And so we'll see what happens. And I'm waiting on pins and needles like everybody else to find out how this happens. But I think that's probably the second thing that's changed, is just how will the convention look? Because previously it's been a big party. The night before, they have speakers, and then the day of, everybody has a breakfast and more speeches, and then you vote in person, and there's, you talk to people on the floor and that sort of thing, and that won't happen, or it may not happen, which would be unfortunate.
Yeah, that was another thing that I was wondering, is with kind of all the changes that we're seeing with changing in the primary, with moving it back, with open up of the mail-in ballots and things like that. the changes to the convention are kind of looking, it's got us on edge. Like, what are we going to do? Because obviously it's an important part of the process. Obviously we picked the AG and other offices. What else is going to change?
And that's the question. And I think what's very clear right now is that everybody's acting in good faith to try to keep everything as normal as possible, and to narrowly tailor the restrictions, with respect to the convention, so that people can vote and that people won't be abridged in that. I think, we're still able to call people on the phone. We're still able to send mail. People are active on Facebook, social media, all kinds of things like that. So people will know where we stand as candidates, and will have the opportunity to talk to us, even if they can't meet us in person, or if we have a limited opportunity. But I think the other thing is, I'm just very grateful I started when I did, running for Attorney General. It has been a very, very long haul, starting back in January of 2019. I've thought about this, if this is all done, if I'm successful and become the next Attorney General, this will have been 2 years of straight campaigning.
Yeah.
And when you think about law school is only 3 years in comparison, it's just sort of an amazing thing to think about how much time that is. But start early. I think that's the biggest takeaway that I can say, because you don't know what will happen and things change, and so you can always raise more money. You can always get more volunteers doing things. You cannot get more time. You just cannot.
Right. That's the one finite thing, right? Time is the one thing that you can't enhance. Right. You can make the most of what you have, but you're not going to be given any more. That's the one thing that, like you said, you can raise more money. You can always, attract more volunteers or more people or whatever, but you have to make the most of every moment that you have. And that's one thing I will say that I feel has been a positive effect. There's a lot of negatives, and people always want to talk about the negatives of the social distancing and the statewide lockdowns. But one thing that I've seen as a positive is more people getting the opportunity to spend time with their loved ones. And, like, I'm becoming closer with my kids there when they were going to school every single day and coming home. There's that how was school? Great. Okay, good. That little one-word answer. Whereas when we're stuck together, extended, time, you have to find different ways to communicate and interact. I think that at least, if we can look at that part of the positives of it, I think it would be a good thing.
Well, and I think that this looking at that, there's so many negatives that happen with the virus. I think one of the positive things is that people have the opportunity to recenter their priorities, and you were sneaking around at that with talking about family ties and things like that. I think that people are also growing an awareness of their own mortality. Someday we will die. We will all die, and so that extends your view of just what's in front of you for the moment, what's important. And for me, this virus has just emphasized the importance of faith and family and country, even more so than before. I mean, I guess my comfort in this time is that God is in control of this, despite the awful stuff that is going on. And so, eventually the Attorney General will be over. Eventually the term, whoever is serving as Attorney General, that will be over. Eventually we're all going to die. And so what is the most important thing that we can be doing each day? And so the answer to that question for me is serving God as he has me do each day. So.
Right. Excellent answer. I mean, I think that's one thing that many more people should take the opportunity to look at is, what can you do in your daily life, even to fulfill your purpose or live your life better. And I think, like you said, more and more people are not only becoming aware of their mortality, but growing aware of the things that are being done to keep us in the dark, right? About things that are really happening out there. We see it on the news and the various media organizations. Not to get off on a tinfoil hat kind of thing, but we know CNN doesn't tell us the truth. We know that they skew the viewers and the stories to shed as much negative light on certain parties as possible. And it's
I read the Bible and the New York Times each day just to see what both sides are up to.
Right. That's good. I like that. That's pretty much, that pretty much sums it up. When you have a newspaper like the New York Times that changes their headline based on the outrage, it just shows you they're not a real news organization.
Yeah, that's right. And I think we all have to be really thoughtful about where do we get our sources. I think one thing that we don't talk enough about is people can get a lot of great information just reading history and reading books. And so getting beyond their own historical bias, because we live in a certain time, in a certain place, and we have our own biases. When you read history, when you read something that's been around for 1,000 years or something, the longer the better. You get the benefit of someone else's perspective at a different time and place. Two, whatever you're reading is good because it's survived. And so I love to read. And that's one of the things that I've been doing in the evenings after the campaigning is done, is reading. Right now I'm reading a book about Henry Clay, and it's exceptional. He was a United States Senator, elected to the Senate when he was 29 years old, which, your Constitution, that is not permissible. You're supposed to be 30. And but they just sort of looked aside at it at the time. And when he was then thereafter, he was elected to the House of Representatives. He was immediately elected Speaker of the House in his first year of service. So that could be like you, Dion, is when you go to Congress, you could be elected Speaker of the House in your freshman year. But reading like that, it just gives you a longer view of the problems that we face, because they had problems too. And it reminds you that the future will have problems too. So we should not be short-sighted in our solutions to problems, because they're just going to keep happening. And so we need to have the long view of things.
Right. And that's an excellent point. I'm glad you brought that up, because far too often, especially in many of the universities that kind of control the culture, for lack of a better term. They don't want to hear from, conservative speakers. They only want to hear from progressive speakers, stuff like that.
Right.
A lot of times history gets kind of glossed over. It gets lost. We have a culture that's offended by history, So I think the more we can kind of share that, read, really, I think that's something that many young people especially should do more of. Everybody really, but the youth should really be reading actual historical accounts of, like you said, there have been problems all throughout history. Problems aren't just going to magically vanish. We're going to have them tomorrow, just like we had them, 100 years ago. It's something that's glossed over way too often. And we're lucky in Indiana. I will say that there are other, states that don't have the selection of books that we do here in Indiana in our schools, is the point that I'm getting at. There's far more censorship that goes on in other states than we've had here.
Well, I think some of the admiration for the framers that I have is their foresight in realizing that not every generation after them would be as virtuous or wise as they were.
Yeah.
Why they introduced the Bill of Rights, because they wanted to take certain things out of the democratic process. Speech. We're not going to restrict people's speech.
Right.
Process. We aren't going to deprive people of life, liberty, or property without due process. Those sorts of things. And so they didn't have, unlike many movements today, the socialist movement has the utopian view. Oh, well, things would be wonderful if everyone shared equally in misery. The framers didn't have that view. They had the view of, people are self-interested. They may not always do the right thing. Therefore, we need to have separation of powers. We need to have a very limited federal government. We need to have states with sovereignty. And they set up this system that has been resilient for the last 200 plus years.
Right. Which shows actually how really, really intelligent these men were, to be able to foresee a process hundreds of years later and the pitfalls and mountains that they would have to overcome with this process for it not to crumble.
Right. And there isn't a republic that has lasted as long as ours with a written constitution. Ours is without peer. It stands alone. And we ought to admire those things. What makes our country great is not that it's ours. It's the principles within our Constitution that is what makes our country great. And it's there for the world. Anyone can have this, right? It's the city on the hill that is the shining light for the world about the liberty of men and our God-given rights. Because what the charter of the Constitution is the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration states that our rights are God-given and that we institute government not to give us rights or privileges, but to recognize those rights and to secure those rights.
Right, absolutely. And it's something that many people kind of, especially the left, seems to feel that the U.S. could be better. Obviously, we can always be better, but we're the only place in the world like us. We are, the grand experiment. And I challenge anyone to name anywhere in the rest of the world, right, that offers the kind of freedoms and protections that the United States offers while allowing, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness the way that we do.
And what I always want to call out is when people accuse the United States of falling short of the principle, they accuse the framers of falling short of the very principles that they set forth, right? They judge the United States by its own principles, right? And so that is true. Like, we do fall short, but it's the principles that we have that are they measure the falling short by. And so that's what people have to remember.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you have children? I meant to ask you before.
I don't, not yet. Nope.
Okay. So, because my wife had asked a question about your kids. I'm like, I don't think he has any children.
My wife and I have been married for 8 months.
Yeah, that's what I thought. That's what I thought. But what would you like other kids, not yours, but other kids to learn from your run for office? When they study, whether you win or lose, right? Mm-hmm. They're going to teach it in Indiana history, especially if you win. Mm-hmm. What would you like them to learn about your run for Attorney General?
I think the greatest inheritance that we can give our children are the constitutional principles that have been given to us. It's to pass on our own inheritance. And so I don't want to show myself to say, well, you should be like me and run for office or anything like that. I want them to adopt and to value and cherish the inheritance that they have been given as American citizens. And I feel a sense not only from being a citizen, but I'm a direct descendant of Mayflower Pilgrims that sought religious liberty here. And what I remind every group that I speak to is that if America fulfill its promise to the Pilgrims, there's no other place for us to go. The grandchildren of those Pilgrims fought with Washington during the Revolution, so I'm a descendant of American Revolution and a revolutionary veteran. And so I would want them to take away the principles that we've inherited, to remember our history, and then to do the role that they have been given by God, whatever that is. And that doesn't have to be in the public sector at all, because there's more than just one institution in society. There's more than government. There are families, there are churches and nonprofits, and there's businesses, and all of that is good. And so I want them to take away their constitutional inheritance from this race.
That's an excellent answer. It really is. That's when I was filling out my Ballotpedia thing. There was a question on Ballotpedia that is like, I forget the exact wording, but something to the effect of, what do you want to leave as your legacy, right? Assuming that you get elected. Right. And I don't want to leave a legacy. I'm not doing this to create a legacy or do anything like that. I just, and I think that your answer really speaks to that, because we as a people, as a free people here in the United States, a lot of times we don't see what happens overseas other than what's filtered to us, right, through the news media. But we don't understand what it's like to not have the freedoms that we do. We have the freedom to complain about everything on the internet,
Right.
but we don't understand what it's like to not have those freedoms, like the people in China, Iran, many other places around the world. So I like that answer, I guess, is the summation.
I guess the better way to have said it would be, and then contrast it with other nations' experience. I read the Gulag Archipelago several years ago, which is about the Gulag state that resulted from communism, and stacks, millions and millions of people stacked on the system of communism. And then in Mao's China, I read a couple of months ago about a biography of Mao. There were 73 million people that died under Mao's rule during peacetime. And so in every instance of communist rule, there's just crazy murder and crazy genocide within the country. And so compare that to the stability, the liberty, the prosperity that we enjoy as Americans. And that's not because any other reason than our constitutional frame of government.
Right. And that's really important too. It's something that frustrates me personally when I see, college students and adults jumping on the socialist bandwagon, as I call it, that I believe have a fundamental misunderstanding of communism, socialism, and the things that lead up to it, and the absolute destructive power of the regimes that are brought to power because of those types of beliefs. And it's one thing that I see happening with our country, with the certain politicians that have ran, for office, ones that currently hold office in various locations. But it's concerning because I think of my children and the type of country that it could turn into if people are allowed to change the laws, if they're allowed to continue to misinterpret the Constitution and stuff like that. It really is, it's scary to me to think about when I'm, long gone and, whatever I'm able to do in my life, great. My kids are going to have to live with the choices that this generation makes.
That's right.
As far as future leaders. So
to remind us of the principle that I said earlier, we get the government that we deserve. And I think the only other issue that I've not talked about so far is just the fact that I'm 100% pro-life. And in contrast to some of these other regimes, communist and otherwise, that do not place a value on life, I believe that every life has dignity and value because they're made in the image of God. And so every life has to be defended. So as Attorney General, I would fight for life.
Okay, you know what? I'm glad you mentioned that. I was reading through some stuff before this live stream, and there were some questions that were asked about how you felt and stuff like that. I knew the answer because I've talked to you, but some people were wondering, is he pro-life? Is he,
Absolutely.
This or that? So I'm glad to hear you say that. I'm 100% pro-life as well. If we don't protect the weakest among us, then I feel that we've failed.
Yeah. No life is safe as long as any life is threatened. So
right, absolutely. Is there anything else that you wanted to say? We're coming up on the close of the hour.
I just appreciate the opportunity to be on the show with you and to just have a longer conversation about important things. And so it's been a pleasure, and I hope it's been helpful for the audience. And hopefully we'll be getting back there soon to knock on doors and to eat some rubber chicken soon. So
right. Oh, that's the hope. Thank you for joining us. I appreciate you making the time. Feel free, again, like I said before we went on, feel free to use any part of this that you may like for your campaign. And I appreciate the fact that you took the time out, and it was good to see you again.
Likewise. Take care, Dion.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, that was John Westercamp, who, as you guys may or may not know, is running for Attorney General. You should know if you were paying attention, but those people that aren't aware of how the Attorney General is elected, he's actually not elected by the citizens of Indiana as such. It's not a popular vote. He's elected by delegates at a convention. So that is kind of why this is a little bit different of a format than what might be done, in in other areas. Many states do it differently. Indiana is a little different in that regard. That's because Hoosiers are different. We're very strange and unusual people, but that's okay. Thanks everybody for coming out. I appreciate it. Remember, 7 p.m. every night and at Dion for Congress, which you can kind of see. I'm going to turn this. There you go. For those of you who may not be aware, I know that some of you may have had questions that were not answered, but you'll be okay. It wasn't for that, but I appreciate it. Take care. God bless you, and God bless the US of A.
If you'd like to support the show, please visit our Patreon at patreon.com/Dion's Daily Dose. This has been Dion's Daily Dose, hosted by Dion Bergeron. Executive producers, Sean Holgram and Michael Beebe. Copyright 2020. Dion's Daily Dose, all rights reserved.